Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Advanced WordPress Plugin Development. In the previous video, we learned about what WordPress REST API is, why do we use it, and we looked at some of the examples of the core WordPress REST APIs that are available, such as getting the posts from WordPress. Now in this video, we're going to talk about registering a route, which means in case if you have some custom data, let's say you have some custom post types or taxonomies that you want to get the data for, or you want to perform something special which doesn't already exist in WordPress, then you can register your own endpoint, which then becomes available for you to access. Okay, so let's see how we can register a route. So let's begin. So in order for us to register a route, we'll call the WordPress function called register REST route. So it takes certain parameters. The first parameter is the namespace, second parameter is the route, and the third parameter is an array of certain information, such as what type of endpoint this is going to be. Will it be a get or a post or delete or put? In this case, let's say it's a post request. It's also going to take the name of the callback function, and the job of the callback function will be basically to get some data from the query parameters and then perform certain actions and get the data from WordPress and return something to the user. All right, now let's see what's there in the endpoint handler. So in this function, we have the request available, and using this request, which is of class type WP REST request, which is a WordPress class. So we can get access to any parameters as added. And then we go ahead and generate the response, basically perform certain actions and generate the response and send it back and return it back using the REST ensure response, which is going to take the data and then return it to the user as the response of that API. All right. You can also return a WP error instance in case if there's any error. And this error information will be passed along to the client along with the status code 500 by default. So in case, let's say something goes wrong, let's say that there's a mandatory parameter that you're expecting and that is not available, then you can return an instance of the WordPress WP error class with your error response. So that will be sent back to the user as a response that something went wrong. Now let's take a look at a route example. So let's take a look at this URL. So this is your root URL, example.com. Then you have the WP JSON, which is the base path of the API. So when you register the route, you won't really be adding this. So all of your routes that are registered by core and your custom routes are going to be available at this URL, WP JSON and / whatever. Okay. Now looking at this part, this is the route. Okay, this entire part. Now inside of this route, now this part is your namespace, in which this is your core and this is your custom namespace. So this NS, you could name it anything that you like. Then you have post and then you have /1. So WP is actually the vendor name, that is WordPress. V2 is the version 2 of the WordPress REST API. Post is that you see post over here is the resource path of the resource that you're trying to access. And 1, for example, is the path variable, which uses regex. Here, this means any numerical character at least once. So this is an example of a route. Now let's actually get into the code and register a route. So we'll go to a plugin called aquila-features. We'll go inside of source, and inside of source, we'll create a file called search-api.php. Okay. And then inside of this, we will add a namespace, aquila-features. We're going to be using all of these classes such as WP REST server, REST request, REST response. You can use WP error, query, post, std class. So you can go ahead and use the use keyword over here with the class name so that you don't have to pass something like this when you're accessing it. Okay. Now we have a class called search API, and inside of that we have a construct function which just calls the init function. Inside of the init function, we will have the REST API init hook, where we need to register our custom function, and the job of which will be to register the route. You can name this function whatever you want. I've named it as register routes because that's exactly what it does. Okay, so when this hook gets fired, this function will be called, and that's the time where the endpoint will be registered. So we have a function called register rest route, and it takes certain parameters as I explained to you earlier. It takes the namespace. So I'm calling the namespace as AF, which is short for aquila-features. That's the name of my plugin. I'm using version 1, so you can write whichever version of the API that you're registering. So I'm doing version 1. Then this is your route /search. Okay. And then the last parameter will be an array. The method will be readable, which means it's a get method. You can see this is the WordPress core class WP REST server, and this is a constant that's available. So instead of like writing it get, I'm just using this constant from the WP REST server. And then we have a callback function called get items, which I have created at the bottom, which I'll explain to you in a moment. Then you have permission callback, return to true. So what is this permission callback? You can see it says that on the documentation, you must also register permission callback for the endpoint. This is a function that checks if the user can perform action reading, updating before the real callback is called. This allows the API to tell the client what action they can perform on a given URL without needing to attempt the request first. So this says that it should return either a Boolean or WP error. If this returns true, then the response will be processed. So in our case, we are returning it true. So that's why our response will be processed. Now, in our case, this is a publicly available API. So we don't really need to check anything whether the user can perform the operation or not. But in case, if you were to do any checks, let's say if the user can perform this operation or not, whether the user is logged in or not, all of those things, we can do that over here. So for example, you can see this is an example of permission callback. Here we have a function available where it's checking whether a user can edit other posts or not before actually going ahead and performing any request, before performing any actions and giving the data back. So in our case, we don't need that. So we're just returning true, which means the response will be processed. It's not going to check anything. Okay, then we have the args available. So what are the arguments that are going to be available in the API? So let's say this is your API XYZ, whatever, question mark, Q equals hello. So that'll be the query. Then you can say categories, and categories equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, comma separated categories. So you can put category IDs, then you have tags. So you can pass these query params in the URL. So that's your arguments. Okay. So you can set whether this is going to be required or not. Like, let's say there are certain parameters which are like must have, you can't proceed further without that. So if you set the required to true, then you're not going to get any data back unless you pass that parameter, for example, Q. In our case, we still want to get the data irrespective of whether user has passed any information or not. So we'll just keep all of these as false. We put the type, whether it's going to be an integer, string, whatever, description of this. And then you have the sanitize callback method, so that when we receive that data from the URL from the user, we are going to use the WordPress sanitize text field function to sanitize that data before actually using that data to query into the database, okay, for security. So yeah, these are just some of the examples of what parameters we'll be using. So we'll be performing some search queries. So we'll need post per page, page number, etc. for pagination. Now, inside of this get items function, which is a callback function, which is actually the endpoint function, okay, which is the endpoint. Here we have the request object available, which is an instance of a WP REST request class, and is going to return the WP REST response. If you were returning any error, then you will also return WP error like that, but I'm not returning any error, so I'm just keeping it that way. That's your return type. You can get the data from what user has passed in the URL, for example, Q equals hello, using the request, and in the request has a function called getParam. It's going to go ahead and grab all of that information. Okay, then we are going to create the arguments for a query like post per page, post status paged, update post meta cache, update post term cache to false, and then we are going to keep adding the query parameters depending on what user has passed. So if user has passed the search term, we'll add that in this list of arguments for our WP query. If he's passed the category IDs or tag IDs, then we're going to build the tags query. And inside of the text query, if he's passed category ID, we'll pass the category IDs we'll go ahead and this will be comma separated IDs in form of integer. Field will be ID, operator will be in, taxonomy will be category. So I want to be able to search the post that belongs to certain categories, like multiple category IDs. Now, in case if you're using any custom taxonomy, then instead of categories, you'll just put that name. Let's say if you were doing like film year or something, whatever the name of your taxonomy is, you'll put that there. So in my case, I'll just use category. I could have very well used the category and, which basically displays the posts that are in multiple categories on top over here. But the reason I'm not doing that is because in case if you want to use any custom taxonomy, all you have to do is just replace this. Because in case of custom taxonomy, this argument is not going to work over here. Like if it was just category we're doing, we're not going to do any custom taxonomy, then we'll just pass the IDs like these. Okay. So I'll leave that. So both ways, you can do it both ways. So I'm doing a tags query here. All right. So you have your tags query. In case if you pass any tags, then you can do the post tag query also. And then finally, when the search query is built, we pass that to the WP query. We call this function, it's a custom function to build the response in a way that we require, because we may not necessarily need to pass all the information. For example, post has more information than just title and content, right? And we don't want everything to be passed as a response. So we can loop through the response. As you can see in the build response, we're just getting the result and just looping through it and basically just cherry picking whatever we need. We don't need to really return everything. I want the ID, title, content, date, permalink, and thumbnail. That's all I want. So I build that. And then I calculate the total number of pages using my custom function called calculate page count. It's going to take total number of posts found in the database and posts per page. And it's just going to divide these two and then add with total found post, modulus operator, post per page. And this is just going to calculate the total number of pages. So let's say there were 91 results found. And if I was going to have 10 posts per page, then the number of pages will be, so the number of pages will be 10, all right? So the last page will just have one post, and each of the other pages from 0 to 9 will be having 10 posts each, all right? This function gets me that information, and then I'm just passing that. So you get the post per page, total post, number of pages. Okay, so if you take a look now, if I access this API, so remember, this will be WP-JSON, and then this is going to be our namespace. So if you go up, this is your namespace, AFN version 1/version 1. And then you have the route, which is search over here, like so. And then if you hit it, you can see I'm getting a total of 9 posts. And the reason why I'm getting that is because inside of the get items, I'm building this search query called post per page, and I'm passing that 9 as default. That's why I'm getting post per page as 9. Post status publish, paged will be which page number you want. So I want the first page by default in case the user has not passed any param for the page number. So that's why I'm just getting the first page. Then you have total number of posts. There are 91 posts in the database, and their number of pages are 11, because if you say 9 multiplied by 10 is 90. So that's 10 pages, and then last one will have single page. So if you want to verify that, see if you see page number equals 2, I will get 9 posts. But if I say page number 11, I get only 1 post, because up until the 10th page, I'm going to get 9 each, and the 11th page will be just 1, because only 1 will be left. So if you take a look, this is the data we're getting is because we called the build response function, and that function basically provided in the shape that we required. So it's returning the posts over here. It's returning the post per page, total posts, and number of pages, right? Inside of the posts, if you see, you don't have all the data. Ideally, you would have received all the data if you didn't have build this response in this way. So for example, in the REST ensure response, if I just return the result in results posts, you have post author, you have post status, comment status. I don't need all that information. It's too much. Imagine you have like a lot of posts that you return, and that's too much of data, right? So I don't need that. So that's why I'm using my build response function and just cherry picking whatever I want to return from my API. So just need the ID, title, content, date, permalink, thumbnail. All right, brilliant.